Everyone knows the story of the Tower of Babel. A city builds a tower to reach heaven. God strikes it down and scatters the builders across the earth, each speaking a different language, unable to understand one another. Genesis chapter 11, 9 verses. One of the most famous passages in the Bible. There is a Sumerian tablet written more than 1,000 years before Genesis was composed that tells the same story. It names the peoples. It names the God. It describes a time when every nation on earth spoke a single language. And then it describes the moment that language was changed. The tablet does not call the story the Tower of Babel. It calls it the Spell of Nudimmud. And the God who acts on human speech is not the God of Genesis. It is Enki, the Sumerian Lord of wisdom, water, and incantations, the same God who warned Utnapishtim about the flood, the same God who shaped humanity out of clay. But this story does not start with a tower. It starts with a war of words between two kings, a messenger who could not remember what he was told, and the invention of writing. The text is called Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta. It is catalogued in the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature as Composition 1.8.2.3. It runs to 636 lines in the composite edition. The surviving manuscripts are Old Babylonian clay tablets, dating to roughly 1900 to 1600 BCE, excavated primarily at Nippur. The largest single witness is Tablet Ni 9601 in the Istanbul Archaeological Museums, joined to UM 2913-194 in the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. Additional fragments come from Kish and Ur. The total manuscript base is approximately 20 to 27 tablets and fragments. The composition itself is older than the manuscripts. Scholars date the original text to the Ur III period, the 21st century BCE, and it was almost certainly composed during the reign of Shulgi of Ur, who ruled from approximately 2094 to 2047 BCE. Shulgi's scribal schools at Nippur produced an entire cycle of heroic literature glorifying the kings of Uruk as his legitimating ancestors. Enmerkar, Lugalbanda, and Gilgamesh were not just stories to Shulgi. They were his dynasty's founding mythology. Enmerkar is the grandson of the sun god Utu. He is the father of Lugalbanda. Lugalbanda is the father of Gilgamesh. Enmerkar is therefore, in Sumerian tradition, the grandfather of the most famous king in Mesopotamian literature. In the Sumerian king list, he is the second king of the first dynasty of Uruk, the man who built the city. The poem opens with Enmerkar demanding tribute from the Lord of Aratta, an unnamed king of a fabulously wealthy mountain city somewhere beyond Susa and Anshan, past 7 mountain ranges on the eastern edge of the known world. Aratta is the source of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. Enmerkar wants these materials to adorn the temples of Uruk, particularly the Eanna, the great shrine of the goddess Inanna. Nobody knows where Aratta was. The text says it lies beyond Susa and Anshan, past the Zubi Mountains, on the far side of 7 mountain ranges. The lapis lazuli connection is the strongest clue. In the entire ancient Near East, the only geological source of lapis lazuli was Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan. Any city described as a source of lapis must lie somewhere along the eastern trade route between Mesopotamia and the Afghan mines. The leading candidate is Jiroft, a Bronze Age culture in Kerman Province, Iran, exposed by flash flooding in 2001. Chlorite vessels, lapis inlays, and possible early script fragments were recovered from the site. The Iranian archaeologist Youssef Majidzadeh argued in 2003 that Jiroft is Aratta. The identification is suggestive but unproven. No inscription has been found at any site naming itself Aratta. The weapon he uses is not an army. It is language. He sends a messenger across the 7 mountains with an ultimatum. Surrender your wealth, or Uruk will destroy you. The Lord of Aratta sends the messenger back with a counter-challenge. Enmerkar responds with a riddle. The Lord of Aratta responds with another. Back and forth 7 times, the 2 kings wage a contest of wit through a single human messenger who must cross a mountain range each way with nothing but his memory. This is where the Babel passage appears. Between the threats and the riddles, Enmerkar instructs his messenger to chant an incantation, a holy song. The text calls it the Spell of Nudimmud. Nudimmud is an epithet of Enki, meaning begetter of mankind. The incantation occupies lines 134 through 155 of the composite text. The passage opens with the description of a golden age. In those days, it says there were no snakes, no scorpions, no hyenas, no lions, no dogs, no wolves. There was no fear, no terror. Man had no rival. It then names 5 regions. Shubur, also called Subartu, the northern frontier. Hamazi, the western Zagros highlands. Ki-Engi, Sumer, the great mountain of the powers of lordship. Ki-Uri, Akkad, the land possessing all that is befitting. And Martu, the Amorites, resting in green pastures. These are the 5 quarters of the Sumerian world, the entire civilized earth as viewed from Nippur. And then the key line, line 146. In Sumerian, Enlil ra-ime, one hi ennada abdog 4. To Enlil in one tongue they spoke. Every nation, every people, every corner of the known world addressed the king of the gods in a single language. Then Enki acts. Line 154. Ka-ba eme ikurenami ni ingar ra. He changed the speech in their mouths, as many as he had placed there. This is the line that Samuel Noah Kramer, the father of Sumerian studies, identified in 1968 as the Sumerian Tower of Babel. He published his reading in the Journal of the American Oriental Society, Volume 88, pages 108 through 111, under the title The Babel of Tongues, a Sumerian version. Kramer's translation was clear. Enki, out of jealousy toward Enlil, confounded a primordial unified tongue, scattering human speech into mutually unintelligible languages. The parallel with Genesis 11 was, in Kramer's view, exact. At least, that was the consensus for 26 years. In 1994, Herman van Steefhout of the University of Groningen published a paper in the Revue d'Assyriologie, Volume 88, titled Another Attempt at the Spell of Nudimmud. Van Steefhout argued that Kramer had the direction backward. The Sumerian verb chain ime kurgar, to change the tongue, is not in the preterite. It is in the prospective. The spell is not describing a past event. It is describing a future one. Enki did not confuse the languages. The incantation is a prayer asking him to unify them. The philological pivot is the prefix I on line 154. Kramer read it as a past tense marker. Van Steefhout, following Bent Alster's 1973 analysis, read it as modal, consistent with the precative prefix he at line 146. The ETCSL editors at Oxford, including Jeremy Black, Graham Cunningham, Eleanor Robson, and Gabor Zolyomi, accepted Van Steefhout's reading. Their official translation renders the line as Enki shall change the speech in their mouths, as many as he had placed there, and so the speech of mankind is truly one. This means the Sumerian version is not about divine punishment for building a tower. It is about a Sumerian king who wants the entire world to speak one language, Sumerian, so that all nations will worship Enlil with a single voice. It is an imperial fantasy of linguistic hegemony, composed under a dynasty that actually attempted something similar. Shulgi of Ur standardized weights, measures, and the scribal curriculum across southern Mesopotamia. A text claiming that the god of wisdom would one day impose a single tongue on the world fits your three. Ideology perfectly. Whether you accept Kramer's reading or Van Stiphout's, the text is remarkable. If Kramer is right, it is a Sumerian Babel, 1,000 years older than Genesis, describing the same event with the same structure. One language, divine intervention, many languages. If Van Stiphout is right, it is something arguably stranger, a prayer for a future in which diversity of language is eliminated by divine decree, not as punishment, but as a blessing. The Sumerian text does not resolve the ambiguity. The verb chain is genuinely unclear. The tense markers in Sumerian are not like English past and future. They depend on context, and the context here is a magical incantation embedded inside a diplomatic poem, which is not the kind of text that comes with footnotes. There is a second revelation in this poem that has nothing to do with language. Toward line 500, after 7 rounds of increasingly elaborate riddles and threats, Enmerkar composes a message so complex that his messenger cannot memorize it. The text says his speech was very grand, its meaning very deep. The messenger, whose mouth was heavy, could not repeat it. And then this. The Lord of Kulaba patted some clay and set down the words on it as on a tablet. Until then, there had been no putting of words on clay. This is the Sumerian origin myth of writing. The inventor is Enmerkar, king of Uruk, grandfather of Gilgamesh. The occasion is a diplomatic message too complex for oral transmission. The medium is clay. The method is pressing marks into it. The dramatic irony of this passage is total. A Sumerian poem celebrating the invention of writing on clay tablets is itself preserved only on clay tablets, excavated at Nippur, and stored in Istanbul and Philadelphia. The technology the poem claims to explain is the same technology that allows the poem to exist. And there is a second irony, deeper than the first. When the Lord of Aratta receives the tablet, he reads it without difficulty. He does not ask what the marks mean. He does not need the messenger to explain. He simply looks at the clay and understands. The text treats writing as self-evidently readable, which implies the audience already knew what writing was and how it worked. The poem is not teaching its listeners about writing. It is flattering them with the knowledge that their king invented it. The archaeological record tells a different story about when writing began. The actual earliest cuneiform, the proto-cuneiform of the Uruk IV phase, dates to 3300 BCE, roughly 6 centuries before Enmerkar's legendary Floruit. It consists almost entirely of administrative receipts, grain tallies, livestock counts, tax records, not royal correspondence, not riddles, not poetry. Writing was invented for bookkeeping, not for sending threats across 7 mountains. But the Sumerians preferred their version. Every civilization invents a noble origin for its most transformative technology. The Greeks credited Prometheus. The Egyptians credited Thoth. The Sumerians credited a king who needed to win an argument. There is one more piece of this story, and it involves actual stone and actual mortar. The Tower of Babel in the Bible is not a metaphor. It refers to a real building. The Enki, whose name in Sumerian means House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, was the great ziggurat of Marduk at Babylon. The Esagila tablet, now in the Louvre under the catalog number A06555, gives its dimensions. It had 7 stages. Each side of the base was 91 meters, and the total height was 91 meters. A perfect cube of sacred architecture. Robert Koldewey excavated the foundations during the German campaign at Babylon between 1899 and 1917. During a drought in 1913 that temporarily lowered the water table, he exposed a base measuring 91.48 by 91.66 meters. The match with the Esagila tablet was almost exact. The ziggurat was rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar II around 590 BCE. A foundation cylinder of his father Nabopolassar reads, "My lord Marduk told me in regard to the Enki, the ziggurat of Babylon, which before my day was already very weak and badly buckled, to ground its bottom on the breast of the netherworld, to make its top vie with the heavens." A black basalt stele now in the Shoyan collection, catalog number MS2063, shows Nebuchadnezzar standing in profile next to the 7-stage tower with a cuneiform caption reading, "Enki, Ziggurat of Babylon." It is the only contemporary visual representation of the Tower of Babel. In 2021, Martin Shoyan gifted the stele to the Iraq Museum. The Hebrew writer of Genesis 11 knew this building. The name Babel in Hebrew is a folk etymology. The narrator explains it as coming from the verb balal, to confuse. But the actual Akkadian name of the city is Bab-Eli, Gate of God. The Babylonians believed their city was the literal gateway between earth and heaven. The Hebrew writer took that name and turned it into a pun. Babel, Babel. The Gate of God became the place of confusion. This is not accidental. Genesis 11 was almost certainly composed during or shortly after the Babylonian exile of the 6th century before the Common Era, when Judean scribes were living in the shadow of Nebuchadnezzar's ziggurat. They took the tallest building in the known world, the pride of the empire that had destroyed their temple, and wrote a story in which the same God who destroyed Jerusalem also destroyed Babylon's ambition. The Tower of Babel is not just a myth about language. It is a piece of theological satire aimed at a building the author had almost certainly seen. The Sumerian version, written more than 1,000 years earlier, has no tower. It has no satire. It has a messenger crossing 7 mountains, 2 kings exchanging riddles, a God who acts on human speech for reasons scholars still argue about, and a moment where a king presses words into clay for the first time. The Enki was demolished by Alexander the Great in 323 before the Common Era. He intended to rebuild it. He died before construction began. The foundation pit is still visible at the site of Babylon in modern Iraq, a square depression 91 meters on each side, filled with groundwater. The tablets that preserve the Spell of Nudimmud are in Istanbul and Philadelphia. The Esagila tablet is in Paris. The Tower of Babel stele is in Baghdad. And the 9 verses of Genesis chapter 11 are in every hotel nightstand drawer on earth. 3 versions of the same idea. A single language. A God who acted. A tower. Or a spell. Or a pun. And the question the Sumerian scribe left unanswered 4,000 years ago is still unanswered now. Did Enki divide the tongues or unite them? The clay does not say. It never did.